Buenos dias, it's me, Profesora Ebert. You have already learned a whole bunch of regular AR, ER, and IR verbs in Spanish. But did you know that there's a type of verb called stem changing verbs in Spanish? We're going to talk about them today. There are actually quite a few verbs in Spanish that fall into this category. Let me show you what I mean. You probably already know where the ending of a verb is. We take a look at our verb. This is our ending. Now, the other part that is not the ending is what's called the stem. With some verbs in Spanish, the stem also changes when you conjugate them. These verbs still use the AR, ER, and IR verb endings, but in order to put these verbs in their 6 forms, there is one more step involved. Let's take a look. There are actually 4 types of stem changing verbs in Spanish. They are E to IE, E to I, O to UE, and U to UE. Let's start today's lesson by taking a look at the verbs that change from E to IE first. One of these verbs is the verb perder. Is this an AR, ER, or IR verb? If we take a look at its ending, we can see the verb perder is an ER verb. So it will use the ER verb endings in its 6 forms, which are O, es, hemos, eis, and en. Eventually you will memorize that the verb perder is an E to IE stem changing verb. This comes with practice. There are quite a few verbs in Spanish that will follow this same pattern. Now these stem changing verbs are a bit easier to remember if you think about them as boot verbs. So, here is my boot. Now all of the verb forms that fit inside of this boot being the yo form, the tu form, the él, ella, usted form, and the ellos, ellas, and ustedes form will get a stem change. So, if we use our example perder, we are going to change the E in the stem to an IE in all of those forms that fit the boot. So we have yo pierdo, tú pierdes, él, ella, usted pierde, and ellos, ellas, ustedes pierden. But the nosotros and vosotros forms of stem changing verbs do not get the stem change. So you just conjugate them like you normally would. And we end up with nosotros perdemos and vosotros perdes. No E to IE. There are quite a few E to IE stem changing verbs, and you will eventually start to remember which verbs are stem changing and which are just regular verbs. This comes through plenty of practice. Now let's take a look at the second kind of stem changing verb. This would be the E to I stem changing category. An example is the verb pedir, to ask for, request, or order. The E of the stem will change to an I in the yo, tú, él, ella, usted, and ellos, ellas, ustedes forms. Pedir is an IR verb, so the endings we use will be O, es, imos, is, and en, which you already know. Now the E will change to an I in those 4 forms that fit in our boot. Like this. Yo pido. Tú pides. Usted pide. Ellos, ellas, ustedes piden. But, just like with the E to IE stem changing verbs, the nosotros and vosotros forms do not get this stem change. So we have nosotros pedimos and vosotros pedís without the stem change. There are multiple verbs in Spanish that change E to I in the stem, and you will start to remember these through practice as well. Now, let's take a look at the third category of stem changing verbs. These are the O to UE stem changers. An example of one of these verbs is the verb dormir, the verb to sleep. Dormir is an IR verb, so it will use the IR verb endings. And the O of the stem will change to a UE in the yo, tú, usted, and ellos, ellas, ustedes forms, like this. Yo duermo. Tú duermes. Usted duerme. And ellos, ellas, ustedes duermen. But remember, just like the other categories, the nosotros and vosotros do not change. So all in all, we have nosotros dormimos and vosotros dormís without the change. The last category of stem changing verbs is the U to UE category. The verbs that fall into this category are easy to remember because there's only one, and it is the verb jugar, the verb to play. Jugar is an AR verb, so its endings will be O, as, a, amos, ice, and N, like you've studied. But the U of the stem will change to a UE in the yo, tú, usted, and ellos, ellas, ustedes forms, just like the other stem changing verbs. So the forms of jugar will be yo juego, tú juegas, usted juega, and ellos, ellas, ustedes juegan. But, just like the other verbs, we don't change the nosotros. So we have nosotros jugamos, and vosotros jugáis. The only other thing to keep in mind when conjugating stem changing verbs is this. What if we have a verb that is a stem changer, like the verb preferir, or the Spanish verb to prefer? Take a look. There's 2 E's in the stem, right? What happens? It's actually easy to handle this dilemma. The E that will change to an IE will actually be the E that is closest to the ending. So, the forms of preferir are prefiero, prefieres, prefiere, preferimos, preferís, and prefieren. Now, off you go to practice your stem changing verbs. This was Señorita Ebert, and now she's saying adios.